Hello, you are listening to Decipher This, a podcast about music and technology from Ensemble Decipher. My name is Eric Lemmon.
And I'm Chelsea Loew.
And we are very excited to be speaking to Dr. Paul Leary today. Paul is currently an associate professor of music at SUNY Oswego, where he is teaching electronic music, theory, composition, music business, and popular music. He is a professional orchestrator and arranger, with his work being featured on broadcast media such as VH1 and PBS. And he also maintains an active practice as a technologist, building custom MIDI controllers from scratch. His electronic music and multimedia work has been performed widely, being featured at over 50 concerts and festivals over the past few years, including Seamus, Root Signals Festival, the New York City Electroacoustic Music Festival, and the Electroacoustic Barn Dance Festival.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Paul. It's so good to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. We were wondering if we could kind of start out talking a little bit about how you got into music and technology, kind of this hybrid field.
I think I was always interested in technology, but I didn't really get into it until grad school, actually. I was mostly just writing acoustic stuff before that. I think I had dreams of being an orchestral composer like most people do. But yeah, I really got interested in technology, I think, when I started feeling like I didn't have anything to say with some instruments anymore. Like I didn't know what you could say original with a string quartet without something different. So I think when I first started using electronics, it just was a gateway into brand new things for me. And so that's how I got started with it.
Your recent work, Meditation, features one of your custom-built MIDI controllers, a giant wooden pendulum you built. Watching and listening to the work, it seems like the pendulum is controlling a generative system based on its oscillation. Since the shakuhachi part is also mic'd, I was wondering whether that instrument also plays a role through maybe a spirometer or accelerometer. But perhaps you can just describe to our listeners how this piece and the NIME works.
Well, first of all, there is a fixed track playing in the background, just to kind of glue it all together and to kind of pace me through it. The pendulum doesn't do much, to be honest. It's more, I'm totally fine saying it's a gimmick because it really is a gimmick. It's a huge LFO, right? So it's just a low frequency oscillator. And I was originally using a magnetometer, but I had this very unfortunate situation where I drove to Florida with the pendulum for a festival and discovered all my data was wrong because of magnetic declination.
Oh no.
So depending on where you are, of course, on the Earth's surface, the data changes. And it's not something you would ever know unless you were smart or unless you drove to Florida and found out. So I drove all the way to Florida with this pendulum, and then my data was completely wrong. And I didn't really have time to fix it either, so I had to kind of fake it. So, and anyways, after that happened, I switched actually to an accelerometer, which basically just uses acceleration data. It's the same sensor, actually, that has a magnetometer, accelerometer, and a gyroscope in it. So, and it's just an Arduino, and it's just sending position and speed to my computer. And then I'm using Max to trigger samples. That's really all it does. And also it triggers some filtering. So the filters change based on position. And then there's a whole nother interface side that the shakuhachi is using. And that's basically a live looping interface with all these loopers and kind of processors. So everything on the shakuhachi is done in real time and is processed in real time. And then there's the backing track playing, and then the pendulum.
Awesome. So I noticed a lot of similarities between that piece and circumference. Are they kind of working in the same way, except instead of basically in your piece circumference, you're using these 3 different bicycle wheels that you're spinning while you're playing as well?
Yeah, that's a similar, the flute interface is the same, actually. But the bike wheels, yes, are just using a magnetic sensor. So it's just it's called a Hall sensor, Arduino Hall sensor that's recognizing a magnet passing a sensor.
A little while back, you were developing a large-scale documentary project based on EVE Online that became quite popular. And in this project, you really seem to have done it all: motion graphics, direction, production, scoring. First, could you tell our listeners a little bit about what EVE Online is and then what the broader goals of this project were?
Yeah. So, I mean, I have actually I'm a pretty hardcore gamer, I would say, at this point. And I started playing EVE over 12 years ago. It's really an incredible game. It's basically a big MMO on one server with over 6,000 solar systems and a huge market and economy. And it's an incredible game made by this company called CCP Games in Iceland. And I was pretty heavily involved in the community at the time, and there was a guy producing. It's kind of the most ridiculous concept. There was a guy producing a book, basically a history book, based on a war that happened in the game in 2004. Because it's actually one of the longest running MMOs too. It's been around since 2004 or 2003, which is before WoW. It's before any of these other MMOs. So it's really survived such a long time. Anyway, so I can't remember how it worked. I won a competition that they had previously for video production. They wanted people to produce videos, basically user produced videos about the game. And I made one and I won this thing. So then that is how I got on their radar. And then this guy was making this book and wanted to make a movie or wanted to make a documentary, kind of a promo to sell the book. And that's how I got hired, basically, to produce that film. So I ended up writing the music. I filmed everything too. Everything was filmed in game it's actually the game's interface. And then, I wrote and produced everything basically, except this. So I didn't write the dialogue. I didn't do the dialogue. That was the only thing really that I didn't do.
And some of the narratives in the videos are about like political conflict that's actually happening or happened inside the game, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's a true story about, this Russian alliance being evicted from their homeland kind of thing. And yeah, it's a fun little project. It is kind of crazy how many times it's been viewed at this point. It's been up for a long time though. So, but yeah, it was a really fun project. And that was the first time, yes, I didn't do the motion graphics in there, actually. That project, I did not do the motion graphics. I'm doing them now, and I did them for later projects, but everything else I put together.
So I was wondering, since you were scoring this film, looping this all back into music, whether you were thinking about kind of the virtuality of the game and the virtuality of these like political alliances at all, and then how like often the virtuality of electronic or electroacoustic music interacts with the specific medium you were using to create these videos, or whether it's something purely like, I'm going to just go for it and evoke kind of this space setting as best I can.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I was very much I was working for the guy who made the book. So I was doing what he wanted, specifically the type of music I wrote. We worked very closely together, and I was basically under his direction, which was totally fine. It was his project. So, but yeah, I mean, I feel like I was definitely trying to serve the game. And, to me, that was kind of it was a commercial project, right? Not meaning that I didn't think the work was good or that it was a different type of quality. It just, that's what it was. I had a ton of fun making it though. I mean, I recorded probably 50 hours of footage and then used 1% of that, of course. So yeah, it was an interesting project.
Do you play the game as well?
So I have to say, for the first time ever, I'm thinking about kind of moving on from it, but I have played for 12 years. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, it kind of comes and goes when I'm really like right now, I'm just during the school year, I don't play a lot, but sometimes I get very invested in it. It's a fascinating game. It's very complicated. It takes it's a lot of time and effort. Mm-hmm. But just the fact that it's really run by other people makes it so interesting.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah, I mean, I've had quite a few instances where I thought I was going to quit, and then something crazy happens in the game, and suddenly it's interesting again. So yeah, it's a really stunning environment, and it's just a fascinating game. So I definitely it's crazy that it's held my attention for so long.
Yeah,
but
it's impressive.
Yeah.
So, Paul, you have a piece called Perfume, which is in memory of Kurt Cobain, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what's going on in there. I believe you're using some samples, and kind of what you were doing with the samples that you took, and what the piece itself is about.
Yeah, it's a complicated piece. I started with the boundaries that everything that was electronic was going to be generated from Nirvana's music. So everything you hear in the electronic track is generated from like stems of Nirvana or Kurt Cobain singing or a guitar part or whatever. And most of it's processed through Max and then organized and arranged in Logic, actually. But the title actually comes from a famous book by Patrick Süskind called Perfume. It was also made into a movie. It's about a 19th century perfume apprentice in Paris, and he's kind of has this incredible sense of smell, and he, in a way, he's kind of a savant. He doesn't fit into the world. And so anyways, it's kind of a tragedy book and movie. It's really great. Anyways, so Kurt Cobain mentions this book in several interviews, that it's kind of one of his favorite books. And his quote about it is kind of interesting. And I use that quote verbatim in the middle of the piece, or actually towards the end of the piece, where he talks about, that Kurt Cobain he associates with the protagonist in the film as someone who doesn't fit in, and it's kind of a tragic story. So he's kind of talking about himself, I think, in a lot of ways. And he even says, I can relate to that when he's talking about the subject. Anyway, so yeah, I really I'm really interested in popular music. I would say that beat-based electronic music is the most important music to me and the most interesting music to me. And it affects my music more and more the more I write. And so that piece to me is kind of a bridge between classical, popular genres that I really appreciate and really find interesting. So yeah, so that whole concept is using stems and using audio from Nirvana's music and Kurt Cobain singing. He sings in my piece in different harmony, of course, with the different instrumentation or what have you. And that's where the concept came from.
Awesome. Well, let's take a bit of a listen to a fragment of Perfume by Paul Leary.
That was Perfume by Paul Leary. So, Paul, obviously we heard a bunch of piano in this. So how does that interact with the electronics? Is that being processed? Is that purely a separate part?
It's entire. This piece is entirely fixed audio with piano. So the piano part is a fixed It's a fixed track with no effects on the piano. There's no click track either. So there's enough in the other track to kind of follow along, which is always my intention. I really don't like click tracks, so I try to avoid them as much as I can. So the pianist just listens to the track and follows along and plays the score.
And when you were drafting the score of the piano part to interact with the electronics part, how were you thinking about this interaction? Because obviously this is a different kind of schemata from thinking like, okay, I'm going to do this live process thing that then takes the pianist's sound and mixes it up, applies effects, something like in the work you were describing for shakuhachi, where you actually have looping and stuff going on. This is fixed media with something else.
Right. I think, it's actually a conundrum I always find myself in, that I really want and love intricate video and audio together. So piano, electronics, and video all in sync rhythmically and doing really cool rhythmic things that are all tightly connected. And I find that to be, obviously using fixed media, you can do that. If you're using live electronics, it's harder. There are ways around that, but I find that it's really difficult. In fact, I tried with my other piece, which actually worked out pretty well. The piece Larger Than Us, where the video, here I haven't mentioned that piece, but it's another piece where there's 7 players plus electronics plus video. And in there, I'm doing live performers that are supposed to be in sync with the video, which is really hard because I literally am trying to line up beats with video so that these stars sparkle in tempo. And the only way to achieve that was actually to have a conductor who was following a metronome on max. So she's like basically just giving them time. Don't deviate from this time at all. If you're dead on, then the video will be in sync with the live performers. So meditations is completely different. There's not a single there's no rhythm in there at all. I guess the pendulum, when it comes in, it's playing a regular rhythm. But other than that music and the piece I'm writing for you guys now is totally free-formed rhythm-wise. So I feel like I'm either doing one or the other in some ways. Like if I'm going to do rhythm, it's going to be super intricate and everything's going to be choreographed together, or I'm not.
So maybe that's a good chance to ask you a little bit about the piece that you're writing for us. Could you tell us a little bit more about the work, what you're having us do, anything interesting or that you're particularly excited about?
Yeah, I'm actually really excited about it. I feel like you probably don't want to hear this, but I've never written a piece like this. And so I kind of feel like either this could work really well or it could not. I feel like it's risky what I'm trying to do, but we're going to see how it turns out. It's for 4 performers who are basically improvising in real time with granular synthesis. So I've basically created tracks in another max patch that I've made. And then these max patches are being granulated in another max patch, which is your live interface. And your interface, it's pretty it's pretty self-explanatory. I have almost like a scrolling score for you. So everyone will have this scrolling score and they start at the same time. But one of the things I'm doing is actually everyone is playing most of their piece with this. So each of you are getting, there are 3 of these I'm going to send to you.
And just for our listeners, Paul is holding up a joystick right now.
Right. So that it's just these they're not bad for $30. They're really great little joysticks. And they just have a million buttons and then you have, of course, the joystick control. So I've programmed them to do all kinds of things. So one of the things you're doing is at the beginning, 3 of the performers are actually like playing a chorale on the joystick, and the joystick is your pitch controller, right? So you have to like find your notes with the joystick.
Oh no.
It's very simple, so don't worry. But basically, if you're on a G, the G will be the center position of the joystick, and then it goes up a fifth or down a fifth if you go up or down with the joystick. So the idea, and I thought, well, I could just have everyone play a keyboard, but how cool would it be to have you guys searching for your notes on the joystick, and then you kind of lock into these chords, and it'll be interesting. Maybe that's the risky part, right? If it works. And then there's a fourth player who uses a keyboard, and they're playing more kind of intricate melody stuff with granular synthesis. And yeah, the piece is called Monolith. And it's kind of going to be a big wall of sound for 10 minutes with a lot of markers. So there's preset markers too, like where, part 2 begins and there's a new preset and you move to that. And then the parameters change, and basically every performer is doing something different, but all within the same realm, basically.
So Decipher will be premiering this new piece by Paul called Monolith on November 11th at the Lab Theater at 7:30 p.m. in Oswego.
After listening to a bunch of your works, I found that your electroacoustic music explores subjects ranging from psychodramas and ancient mythology to futurism and sci-fi. In my mind, these themes are not too unrelated. After all, you only need to watch 2001: A Space Odyssey, speaking of monoliths, to get them all wrapped up neatly in a bow. But what draws you to these themes? Perhaps for a launching point, I'm thinking of your works Festus's Fire and Fragments of a Dream alongside the documentary on Eve that we've already discussed, or your more recent work, Larger Than Us.
I mean, I think that I'm definitely very interested in, all of that. I love anything that's, it's hard to describe. I guess anything that's mystical or anything that's, I'm super interested in space-related stories or, basically anything sci-fi, or that's definitely always been kind of, I guess it sparks my imagination is a good way of saying it. So, yeah, I mean, I think I'm also deeply kind of a ritualistic kind of person. And so ritual I find super fascinating. So the meditations is that way. I'm not a religious person at all, but I find the practice really fascinating too. Yeah. So, I think that those themes kind of really draw me to them just because of I think the sense of unknown and the quest to learn new things about the universe really fascinated me. And those are all tied in, I think, with all those things. So, my music tends to reflect that stuff a lot. Yeah.
And so is there a particular theme that you were thinking of with regards to Monolith that connects into this? Is it literally, we're going to do some Arthur C. Clarke moments going on?
I mean, it's kind of like, an immovable ancient force or object. That's kind of how I think about this piece and the music. One of my favorite composers ever is Arvo Pärt, and you can probably hear that in my music. You'll hear that in this piece a lot. And so, he's another composer to me that's, of course, deeply interested in ritual and meditation and stillness. And emptiness and fullness at the same time. It's hard to describe, but so I think that, to me, my piece, it is this wall of sound. It is kind of like something that to me feels like it has no beginning and end and kind of has been forever. And that's to me kind of like what a monolith represents in some ways. It's these immovable objects that have always been there or always existed. So that's kind of I think the impression I'm trying to give with this piece.
Mm-hmm. Are you using Parrott's tintinnabulation techniques at all, or is it merely just a evocative aesthetic that you're drawing upon?
I kind of reference that a little bit. I love his stuff where it's like the piece, over an entire piece, it progresses through a single octave. Like, in fact, this happens in my piece in Monolith. There's 2-octave motion up the minor scale that happens in a melody, basically. It's not a melody, but it's just, so there's kind of this push through time that way. I'm really interested in drones, of course. I'm using those everywhere, which is a very Arvo Pärt thing. So I'm not really using that method, but then my music's very triadic and harmonic. It's very tonal. I guess not tonal, but it's very triadic is a good term. So, and that of course is very rooted in Pärt's, tintinnabuli stuff. So I think more it's the aesthetic of his music though. It sounds so ancient, which I love, and it really draws me. It's funny, I'm not religious at all, but I'm so drawn to religious practice, but not at all at the same time. Like I love to go into a European cathedral and just sit for hours. It's like, it just moves me, but the religion itself doesn't move me at all, but these spaces and the idea of the religion really appeals to me. It's the details that get in the way.
Mm-hmm.
So, Paul, do you have any upcoming pieces or projects that you're particularly excited about?
Well, after I'm done with this piece, I have a big project in the spring. Right now, I'm in the process of filming. It's so hard to describe these things because it's so much stuff. It's dancing and multimedia and live electronics and video, and we're filming right now. So it's actually a big project. It's called The Weight of Water, and it's about water in our local area and kind of water in our universe, in our small universe in upstate New York. And so there's going to be a standalone film that's going to be an hour long that I will be making. And we spent this last weekend actually all over the area, kind of in our local streams and stuff, and in Lake Ontario, filming with drones and with cameras and doing all kinds of videography for it. I'm writing the music, of course, but then on February 5th, it's going to be a actual concert where we'll use the video or parts of the video in projections for a stage production of the same thing. And that's when I'll do live electronics as well and all sorts of different stuff. So it's a crazy big project that finally feels like it might actually be real. We got derailed by a year because of COVID. But now it's finally coming together, and we did our first filming this last weekend. So
very cool. Is this more of a collaborative project where you're working with a handful of artists from different fields?
Yes. I've neglected an entire aspect too. I'm working with a poet professor here at Oswego named Soma Non-Fraser, and she is writing poetry and prose for it. And then I'm working with a dance professor at the University of Rochester named Rose Pascala Beauchamp is her name. So she's an amazing choreographer, and she's kind of actually doing most of the directing of the film footage, because it's basically dance film footage with a lot of stillness and just stunning camera work, basically with drones and stuff. So it's really cool. And then the stage production will have kind of more polished performance stuff. And then I am also building another controller. So I will be building a large, I haven't, I'm kind of on the fence about what it's going to be, but it's going to be some sort of interactive controller for the dancers, where, if they turn things, sounds come out of it, basically. But it'll be a big wooden implement, a thing with sensors on it. So So yeah, it is kind of everything. It's another massive project with all of the things I'm interested in kind of all in one. So it's kind of overwhelming. I think though, after I did the Larger Than Us piece, which is again the 7 performers, video and electronics, I definitely feel like I can do it. I'll pull it off, but it is a lot of components. There's probably going to be motion graphics on it too, and I got to do all that myself, and it's
wow.
Yeah. I got into video stuff mostly because I just felt bad asking videographers to spend more time on my work. Because when I did video stuff, I always wanted really intricate video editing. So every beat is recognized in the video. Editing is like emphasizing the rhythm, and that's just so much time and work. And so to ask someone to do that, I felt bad. Or I just wouldn't get it. And so I just started saying, if I want this video, I need to do it myself. And so that's how I kind of started doing video stuff.
Right. So where can people find your work?
Man, my website is so out of date. I need to update that thing. But on my website, paulleary.com, there's quite a bit of stuff on there. There's also a bunch of my Max patches that are kind of available for download. If any, I really love Max, and I spend a lot of time building GUIs and designing software in there. So there's a lot of stuff on my website, paulleary.com, with 1 L in the middle, though. It's not Paul with 2 L's, 1 L in the middle. That's my main website, and a bunch of my Max patches are posted on there as standalone applications. And yeah, and then on YouTube, I have a YouTube channel. There's a lot of stuff kind of on my YouTube channel, which is Paul Leary. You just type in Paul Leary. But you have to be careful, because I am not the bass player of the Butthole Surfers, who is also named Paul Leary, which I'm sure you discovered.
Yeah.
It's like you type in Paul Leary music, and it's all about Paul Leary, the Butthole Surfers guy. So, it's kind of unfortunate, but
That's great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great to hear about the new projects coming up and all your music in the past as well. And thank you all for listening. Again, this is Decipher This. Special thanks to Paul for joining us today. And your hosts are me, Chelsea Loew.
And I'm Eric Lemmon.
And the episode was edited and produced by Joseph Bohikian.